A brief synopsis of Christian 21 revelations for the Great Spiritual Awakening, the Fall of Great Tartary, and some other stuff. Part 2 of 2 by Leon George. Sinclair continued from Part 1. Draker planning par excellence. They made globes before they actually needed them. A landmass showing a fake coastline on a spherical projection of a map to bolster globe theory. Since they went to all that trouble back then to do that, it's a simple to associate the medieval texts with no provenance as the blatant setting of the new narrative of the time, or what people would believe when they consider the medieval or dark ages. The theory of a spherical Earth, globe theory, was pioneered by ancient Greek philosophers, starting with Pythagoras around 500 BC, who proposed it based on aesthetic perfection, and later Aristotle 322 BC, who provided physical evidence. C. 276 to 194 BC, first measured the Earth's circumference. But again, that is untrue. Wikipedia and/or Google and/or fact-checkers are all censorship, only, well, censorship and fake intel. Think. You were here as food. Why would they tell you the truth about anything? They hated you, you just had the illusion of safety, that's all. Apart from a Omicron Draco's bedroom, this place here is the most dangerous place on Gateway 10. You were not here to better yourselves and be happy. That, the illusion. You were supposed to assume that that is why you were here, focusing on wealth, cars, celebrities, showbiz, and money, while a large percent of you were getting harvested on a repetitive loop cycle. No one escaped it, no one. During one life or the next, you would surely be raped, harvested, and killed again. Or did you think that some of the tuna that go to the canning factory just live a happy life in the canning factory, never getting canned? Well, that's not possible to be the only tuna spared in a tuna factory, unless you are a 33rd degree Freemasonic tuna, or sold soul tuna. That's the only time a tuna can be caught, end up in the canning factory, and get spared. 'Cause it's a 33rd degree Freemasonic tuna that kills cod roe and caviar. Greek philosophers were all Tartarian philosophers, if they even existed in the first place. We shall find that much of these eras, Byzantium era, Roman, Greek, Cretan, these are all made up, or as usual, a small bit of truth wrapped up in massive amounts of bullshit to keep you far away from reality, whilst leaving you with tangible avenues of contemplate, to satisfy your interest and make yourself feel like educated and cultured tuna, worldly tuna, intellectual and academic tuna. The Antikythera mechanism was Tartarian. They have to physically show you conundrums. These conundrums are only conundrums because the official stories are all lies. The history books are not true. History. They are a story that the parasites wanted you to believe in. They made this fake knowledge a prized accolade with grades and degrees, more degrees than a bucket full of protractors, lol. But they had you doing backflips for peanuts, less than peanuts actually, because they made you pay them the sacks of peanuts so that you can backflip when they tell you to. That's what the medieval manuscript, Europe 1327, and its whole genre of medieval volumes that were all in pristine condition actually were. They were the technical information for the patchy societal mechanics of a society that never actually existed. It was another illusion, veiling a threatening society that had an incompatible way of life, a life that didn't take the piss. They didn't charge for energy, it was all gained for free. They had banking, but did not charge interest or any fees on bank services, only on banking products. Health was abundant, lifespans were longer, water and air were pure, and the food was nutritious. When your mind throws up an image of medieval England, you have in your cerebral cortex a picture of Richard III in a dining hall with 20 fireplaces, leg of lamb in one hand, wearing a white nightie, running down his bearded chin, and demanding more mid, a bit like Joffrey Lannister. But that's the image that they wanted you to assume. That's why it was literally presented to you as a semi-complete historical record, in these suddenly abundant medieval works of pristine condition, complete sets of information. Albeit somewhat vague in body, it still shed some light on the Dark Ages, the only light in the absence of memory, a memory deleted after you exited the sun when you last died. It's not easy erasing a whole empire of hundreds of millions of people, making sure they all died, all of them. In Russia, if you spoke Tartarian after the 1930s, you would go to jail for 10 years. They forced people to forget their own culture, smashed and burned their entire empire, leaving only the worldwide city centers that show colonial style and Romanesque. Buildings like St. Paul's Cathedral, Westminster Abbey, Big Ben, almost every single courthouse on the planet, and all the now old libraries, museums, town halls. All these have ornate masonry joints with no mortar, cut so precisely that a razor blade will not pass between the joint. This level of accuracy was maintained and sustained for over 1,000 years. The same domed concepts of energy harvesting and the same style of construction, with cultural differences, same ornate fluted and vaulted ceilings, huge acreage of stone. Think of the great cathedrals, all completely perfect, but there was much more. As we saw above, hundreds of cities were taken out, literally leveled to the ground, disappeared in their entirety. Notice all the government buildings in all the countries and all the Rothschild mansions. These are all Tartarian buildings. Rockefellers, Rothschilds, and other elite bloodlines, all over the world. They all lived in these chateaux and castles, stately homes, sprawling manor houses, and private estates. They are all Tartarian creations. That's what they do. They needed the giants to build up the realm, ready for the Freemasons from the previous reset, to occupy these now institutions, libraries, museums, and houses to be the bastions of scientific and geographical study, no less, all Tartarian buildings repurposed. But the giants are a force to be reckoned with. Some of these giants were 35 plus meters tall, so any army will have a tough time repelling 50 giants that are 30 plus meters tall. Can you see the problems associated with pissing large numbers of giants off, and why the parasites needed them gone? They needed them to build the realm up, to cut, dress, transport, and lay the stones for these architectural machines, so the giants became unnecessary. They were not needed any longer, so they killed them all. The giants were taken out first to stop any of them noticing the reset and deciding to help the little people. So mostly, the giants were dispatched at the Freemasons, evident by the plethora of post-reset photographs showing 1 to 3 well-dressed men with top hats and the Masonic hidden hand clearly on display in the photographs, were the only people in a shot of utter devastation. There were no buildings standing, just burnt tree stumps, rubble, and desolation. These men stand there looking like proud industrialists, successful pioneers of the future, when they were merely child-killing nonces who were spared the reset for their loyalty in the deception, and their keenness to help sacrifice kids and pay the demons in Louche. So these 33rd degree Freemasons are spared. They then help restore order to the chaos, and start the clear-up and recovery of artifacts that are not supposed to be seen by the new populations when they get here in the next 510 years after migrating from some famine or a 3 years winter somewhere. Don't forget that this is only a small portion of adults, not children. Well, there are thousands of children that need parents. But they were pretty much all grown in a lab, in Dumbias all over the world, cloned from the millions of children who were sacrificed in the reset that just ended. The same souls that were sacrificed will immediately reincarnate back into the food chain here in the known lands. There was no way out until now. Not at any point was there a way to leave unless with the giants from Realm 2. Immediately before a reset, they'll put word out and a couple of thousand souls will make it out to Asgard, and then to go to the Ancestral Republic in Realm 2 to wait for the Great Awakening of their brothers and sisters. They clone the kids as and when required. Why else would there be so many orphaned children and no adults, with no reason for the lack of parents? They ate all the previous children, the new children are all clones. No famine, war, pestilence, or plagues in that time to account for 10 million people going missing just in the 3 years of that cold-as-fuck winter in 1916 that I mentioned above. That was just 3 years during the reset. It's not that it would cost too much to reproduce architecture like this in stone, these huge precise buildings, ornate carvings, etc. It's that we can't reproduce them. We still don't know how they did it. Well, the public doesn't, and neither do the makers of these epic Tartarian videos I keep seeing. Years of research, all released within the last 4 weeks. Dozens and dozens of them, epic videos. They cover all topics of Tartaria, but they don't know why or by whom. It's still a mystery to the world, but not to Christian 21 followers. We already know while we are watching the intel for the first time what the reality was. It's just nice to get the finer detail on the mysteries that are perplexing the experts. There are people out there writing great books on the subject of Tartarian culture and expertise, free energy, all aspects to the mud flood and its implications, meltology, the orphan trains, and the whole shaboodle. And they get on these truther web shows and plug their latest book with all their research in it. It's always great research, but the resonating army are light years ahead of any of this research. We even know the conclusion to it all, and also what to expect after, who did this, why, how, when, and where. We are way past researching other people's research, save a hint at the topic of discussion. That's all we need, thanks to Christian. We can now do the rest on our own. What a liberating that is. If these great researchers would stop demanding proof research data equations, then they would find the answers that evade them. How can you see when your eyes are closed? Don't worry, loads of them will be jumping on this and adapting it to their theories of what happened and why, when all they need do is to soak up this free intel, dwell on it, and listen to the logic. This is not about book sales, or we would have been a multi-millionaire off the back of this intel if I wanted to be a bell-end and sell books. I'm here to promulgate this memory, to explain what is going on in the world right now, with Christian 21's epic level of revelations. It's not a time to be hankering after finances, money, or gold. This is the greatest event since the first tone in the universe. Let that sink in. Gateway 10 and the other gateways had never been firing on all four cylinders for hundreds of thousands of years before the parasitic inversion. All species had known that something very bad was on the way in the future. That day came, the evil set up, and it stayed for approximately 70,000 years. So please feel free to take this information and do whatever you want with it. You don't need to credit Christian 21 with the intel. You can pretend that you worked it all out by yourself, or channeled it all from Pleiadians. You can write books, make money, and be someone, but don't forget, we are all being monitored. You heard of Judgment Day? It's pretty famous. Ask Sarah Connor. Well, a Judgment Day is this year, and it's got nothing to do with religion or God-s. You are being judged by 12th density ETs and your own self. Your thoughts, deeds, and actions will dictate where you end up. Sorry, I digressed again. The year without a summer, as mentioned above, was a 3 years winter. It wasn't caused by Met Tamboa on an Indonesian island. It was a reset in progress. 10 million people didn't migrate looking for food. Some Irish went to North America to resettle, but most of those 10 million people, definitely all the children, were sacrificed. That's the whole idea of a reset. They were taken and sacrificed and eaten. That's what a reset is. They take stem cells from the children before sacrifice to clone them for the new repopulation agenda, hence 250,000 orphans. They are not technically orphans. They were not born from a woman's womb, yet they are human children with souls in their chest. Obviously, the parents of the eaten children were sacrificed and murdered during the reset. Some are spared because they need some adults that were taken to other non-reset locations, oblivious to why they had had to migrate away for a few years. They probably were given some story about a plague of severe weather, so they know nothing as to a reset. They return after a few years away to repopulate, confident that the story they were told is true, so they don't bat an eyelid. They are given a believable story as to the desolation apparent. If they were informed that a monster tornado had done all the damage, they would believe it and ask no more questions. They are just here living a life, adopting 3 kids to raise. They dunno they are raising clones, and they dunno about Freemasonry either. The emergence of the foundlings appeared in 1820 and had come to a halt by 1880. There was no crisis to explain their appearance, no wars in that time to account for so many orphans, no famine either, just 250,000 children with no parents, and no provenance either, origin unknown. The census data for this era in time shows puzzling gaps, with most children entering orphanages having had no known history whatsoever, 250,000 of them, in a few short years. You need to notice the timing of all these seemingly unrelated occurrences going on all over the planet at the same time. They are all timed and planned. For instance, as one example only, it's July 1816. Paddy and Seamus are in the pub for a wee dram. It's harvest time next month, everyone's hungry, and the weather was hot, until yesterday when it started snowing. After a month, Paddy and Seamus decide to get the next boat to North America. They get a few hundred villagers who agree to come with and start a new life in the prairies of the Wild West. In over a year, a few thousand Irish end up in America. But they use a scenario like that to explain away many more people. Okay, a few thousand went to America, but we are talking about 10 million people disappeared somewhere in just 3 years. This is a reset proper. Don't forget that the last reset started in America somewhere on the West Coast in 1728. By 1887, it had reached the west of Russia, but different areas are reset at different times. It's not like a wave of crusade that spread from west to east. It was sporadic resetting, country-specific, for an agenda that only the parasites were aware of. It could have started in South America and worked its way north, but it didn't. That was a previous reset civilization. Pre-Columbian civilizations were there first, then they were reset, then the Inca, Aztec, Maya, etc. There would have been a pre-Columbian culture, and likely a pre-pre-pre. The Roman Empire and the Greek histories are also, not surprisingly, fake, mostly bullshit, with a hint of truth in the mix, just the same as the medieval texts discussed above. They were installations to cover gaps that could not be explained, wars that never happened to explain mass migration, other mass. Cullings resets harvests for many reasons, but always with the same overall intention: a bloodbath of Satanism, torture, rape, and the sacrifice of the entire population of the geographic area in question. They are sneaky little reptilian bastards. Look what they did. Revelation 20, TJV 1. And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. 2. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. 3. And cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled, and after that he must be loosed a little season. Religious people and the pious are expecting that 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth returning, to be any time now. But, as usual, that is not what's happening. That 1,000 years of Christ's reign was Tartaria. I'm going to have to ask Christian more about this because I'm vague on it, but the fact that Satan will be let loose for a little season. The end of Tartaria was 1887 in 1900 proper. So a little season could well be about 200 to 250 year. I mean, a little season doesn't mean 3 weeks in July, does it? The little season ended in 2016. So this is why they attributed the J seen in buildings and on coins as J870 or I640, and not actually 1870 and 1640 respectively. Other buildings had later adaptations to include the one prefix. But they literally deleted an entire empire in under 200 years, destroyed 80% of the buildings, and all of Tartarian infrastructure, usurped all the remaining Tartarian edifices as government property, incarcerated those catatonic in shock after witnessing their children and family being raped and slaughtered in front of them, housed them in lunatic asylums because they remembered what the old world before the reset started was like, and they lived through the carnage. They, like the giant Velatin, discussed above, were broken, destitute, and in severe trauma and shock. Although the Velatin didn't witness the reset, some rural places did escape the carnage. In very remote places in mountain ranges, some people survived, and I assume now that it was slightly more than previously assumed. The Tartarians didn't put up a fight they could have with their technology, but they had never had anything like this happen before. They were in complete shock. It came by surprise. By the time the armies of the New Order arrived, it was pretty much all over for Tartaria. That was the moment that the Revelation 20-3 discusses. And cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. and after that he must be loosed a little season. Google. As of future earth, following his coming and the binding of Satan. It represents a time of restored creation, fulfilling divine promises, and for many serves as a bridge between the tribulation and the final judgment. That biblical crap is all utter bullshit. I'm not quoting the Bible because of its value, I'm quoting it to show you Satan wasn't sealed up anywhere. The parasites have been here with uninterrupted authority for at least 60,000 years. Satan is just another lie. According to the Bible, Satan was cast into the pit just before the dawn of Great Tartary. Great Tartary was the 1,000 years of peace, and his seal's expiration date was sometime just prior to the 1728 reset, one must assume. The little season that he was let loose came to an end in 2016, or shortly before. They stole 1,000 years of perfection, harmonic lifestyles with staggering technology. No one was greedy, no one wanted more than the next person. Everyone had all they needed all the time. Health was a matter of walking in the park near the frequency architecture, a lap of the church temple with the bells ringing. This would reset your DNA to homeostasis without your even trying to be healthy. Travel was fast, clean, and driven by pneumatic air pressure, mostly created by natural aquifers that the Tartarians adapted to suit their needs. Large salt caverns were dug out into precise submerged harmonic resonance chambers, making pressure differences occur where none previously were. They were able to use the difference in the weight of salt water versus fresh unsalted water, water on its natural path through the planet between nodes. We are talking about engineering projects that span several continents. The natural properties of salt, especially large amounts of salt, in water, keep the water moving constantly. Now this is where it gets interesting. Remember back a few months ago, Chris explaining about the ley lines, and how they harvest the electromagnetic energy emanating from these crystalline lattice membrane networks that enter major and minor nodal points on the planet's surface, while simultaneously dampening the local frequency directly on top of the ley line itself with train tracks, then tarmac roads and concrete, which severely dampens the frequencies. Think of what happens if you put your phone in a lead box. It will not ring because the lead dampens the frequency emitted from the cell phone tower to your phone handset. Then, last week I wrote about the Tartarian locomotives that ran on mostly superinduction steam generation from atmospheric resonance chambers situated on the front of the trains. The physicist who accompanied the researcher who documented this noted that this atmospheric collection system would indeed work. She was examining Train 43 in a Philadelphia train museum basement. It was the only surviving intact example of one of these devices, which originated in Eastern Europe long before the 1800s. The physicist was even able to explain how this device worked. She saw the Fibonacci coil patterns, golden ratio windings of the array itself, and saw it for what it was immediately. Encased in the two domed objects on the old steam trains, or at least some of the old steam trains, would activate in the presence of a magnetic field, causing terminals inside the boiler to superheat the water by magnetic induction, reducing the need for coal and maximizing efficiency. But the key point here is that she said, however, the only way this would work is if the train track passed through pockets of electromagnetism between refilling with water and or coal. I can only assume that there are, or were, pockets of electromagnetic energy available along the route somewhere. The train needed some coal to get the pistons going and the locomotive grunting forward on the track ahead of it, but after it got to about 15 to 20 miles per hour over a couple of miles, the atmospheric array would gather enough energy to superheat the boiler without using any more coal for the rest of the journey. Well, Christian explained in detail how come the ley lines emanate a large amount of concentrated electromagnetic energy as they move on to the next node, and back like an alive, pulsating, and energetic grid. Christian explained how they use the Baphomet power pylons to harvest this energy from alongside the train tracks, next to them, in farmers' fields usually. This is because the tarmac train track and negative emotion of rush hour traffic, accidents, delays, roadworks, etc., on packed trains and roads, all generates low-frequency loosh, quite a lot of it. Like we say, they wasted nothing whatsoever, not even the loosh generated off a family argument on the way to Alton Towers on a Saturday in the school holidays. The train tracks and roads all sit on top of the ley lines, and the ley lines sit on top of brine aquifers. The ley lines are not the only energetic systems on the planet. The aquifers that run below the planet's surface, not coincidentally, also run along the same path as the ley lines themselves, generating even more energy. These underground brine systems are what powered the Tartarian Empire's main civil mechanics and engineering works in projects. They could use this natural system with no moving parts to lift heavy objects with brine hydraulic systems. Most of the acoustic chambers are still there, just repurposed as tourist attractions as the underground salt cathedrals. Some in Romania argue that there is an underground Ferris wheel in one, with restaurants and an underground boating lagoon where people can paddle about, looking at these massive hewn structures with geometric patterns on the walls and floor. Yet the tourists and visitors haven't a clue what these rooms were for. These cavernous but geometric rooms had water rushing through them at one point, and were carved to create a harmonic frequency, as was all Tartarian architecture. Tartarian technology was completely ergonomic in nature. For instance, the Kremlin-style roofs of Russian Tartary would, from eyewitness accounts in some cities but not all, sing when the wind hit them. They didn't hum, they sang. At certain angles, certain harmonic tones would be generated, all tuned specifically to certain wind speeds prevalent in the locations that these buildings were situated at. Different dome turrets at different heights would produce a continuous healing melody that cured all ailments. Longevity was twice what it is now, sometimes even longer. Everything was healing, everything was frequencies and harmonics, even construction. But the underground salt brine aquifers follow the lattice membrane network routes between nodes and branch out to other nodes on the grid. The train tracks are on top of these, suppressing the most powerful energy, pushing it out sideways into surrounding fields and farmland, maybe a river or two. This is where they harvest the power from, the energy forced out along its natural path, pushed left or right. That is where you will see the harvesting pylons. They do not harvest positive energy from cities. Cities are where the loosh is harvested from the volatile capacitor banks of the tower or blocks of human emotion. Angst, grief, sadness, loneliness, despair, drugs, crime, broken homes and arguments, sexual abuse. Welcome to a housing estate in new dystopia. So they only harvested the positive energy from the open farmland and natural areas. You can't experience this positive energy. It's way too positive. It might heal you, and they didn't want that happening, so they chose frequencies in the negative range, so that people who live in half a mile of a large power pylon, or worse still if you happen to live right under one of them, you are 3 times more likely to get glioblastoma brain cancers. I think it's 3 times more likely. This is what I remember from a documentary I saw when I was 12 in 1987, but it stuck me all this time because we knew a traveler family who lived in 3 caravans right under a massive pylon in Malden, Essex, UK for many years. The documentary said 11 years seemed to be the time duration required for cancers to develop when living within half a mile of one of these things. I used to suck up information like this when I was a kid. So, imagine if you are walking your dog, following a motorway in the distance to your right. Pathways through farmland tend to follow power pylon routes in many sparse places. Fire breaks in forests follow pylon routes for obvious reasons. The path is naturally cut to lay the power cables, so a natural fire break will cause human foot traffic between locations, right under a dangerous frequency field that will cause negative effects on your system, not in any way positive. The lattice membrane network's path's end is always where cathedrals and churches are situated on nodes. And as a byproduct of cathedrals and churches, villages spring up. Villages turn into towns, and towns into cities, but the start-off point for a culture is the node where the cathedral or church is. These are not the only nodes. Water has nodes, the ocean also has nodes. Saltwater nodes are the most powerful energetic locations. River bends also have harmonic lenses, which are also powerful areas of electromagnetic energy. This is why some people have filmed pixies, fairies, gnome-looking critters, etc. These beings are real. They just live in a different overlay, in forests, in the same forest that you walk through with your dog, but out of phase, so to speak, in a different simulation in the exact same location. And notice that when these things are seen and recorded, mostly it's near water, a stream, or a river. That's because of the harmonic lens at the location, distorting the parasitic overlay. Someone at the right frequency would be able to see and interact with these beings in this location, if it was active. It wasn't an accident Tartaria disappeared. It was a reset like you just avoided in 2016, and the deletion was necessary because Great Tartary was a worldwide empire that flourished in resplendent beauty for 1,000 years. It had a highly benevolent ruling emperor-king whose lineage went back 400 years, almost half of the empire's existence. The leadership was loved by all in the empire, and their planet-wide society was not based on scarcity, it was based on abundance, fairness, and good intention to all, living with nature, not going against it. They almost found everything relating to Tartaria, almost every possible reference in any archive, any library, and they destroyed it, but they couldn't delete the maps. There were too many of them in print, in homes, and in workplaces. They couldn't erase the testimony from survivors either, and there were only a few, but now there are none. There were a bunch of different species, giants, elves, dwarfs, other miniature people, anatomically perfect, yet miniature people no taller than 2-3 tops. Other creatures as well, they erased it all, in an almost seamless deletion. I mean, those medieval comics entered the stage in the most Mac way imaginable. Mac, a highly suspicious, pretentious, glitzy, over-the-top, ostentatious, flamboyant, egotistical, cheap, flimsy, crass, rude. For a start, they were available in Mac as fuck numbers. 18,745 books. That's Mac as fuck. You may get 10 or 15 such books, but not in pristine condition and not with no provenance. Pristine condition. That's Mac, inconsistent ink chemistry. Also Mac, clustering of dispersal into world stage over 10 years in 3 clustered waves. Mac as absolute fuck. We discussed this many times in the past already. It's known of as Dracoco future planning. This happened in the same decade as the orphan trains were redistributing children all over America. 550,000 children, most of which also had origin unknown written in their orphanage records. It was either that, or a parent's deceased, or of uncertain origin. Plus was the decade when the showcasing of the World's Fairs got started, with mega builds and crystal palaces made of iron and glass, spanning several football pitches and hundreds of acres of fairground parks and public boulevards, boating parks, and lagoons to croon by. Don't forget that the World's Fairs were there to showcase the latest inventions and life-changing technologies that were now available, a bit like the UK's Ideal Home Exhibition, but on a much, much larger scale. But again, these World's Fairs were not to showcase the technology of the future, they were to rub your nose in what they were just about to take away from you, and what the past culture used on a daily basis. It was showcasing the technology of the past, not the future. But the reset denizens obviously didn't know this. They didn't know that they were all mostly cloned babies now in their 30s to 40s. They didn't know about any reset either. They were only 3 to 5 years old when they were brought up from the DUMB cloning centers below ground and put on our population trains to go to orphanages, to hopefully be adopted, to get an education in the spherical globe model, learn to read and write, and go off to paying employment, and the construction of the future of society that the parasites had planned for them. Birth certificates lead to the straw man leads to joinder leads to fines and imprisonment, and that involves your cestu equivi birth certificate bond being pillaged by the government for vast sums over your life. They rob your bond for far more money than you actually earn. The same people also tax your wages and also make you pay back your own money, plus interest. Einstein's cosmological constant was a desperate attempt to give gravity a breath of life. They needed gravity to explain the globe model, or how else can seawater stick to a spinning ball? This complex mathematical formula, formulated by the mind of a genius, who was actually a tranny free martin who wore women's clothes. Einstein was not intelligent. He was just an Elon Musk actor filling a space in the lies, same as Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, etc., etc. A free martin occurs rarely in nature. It can be forced to happen during the 6th week of pregnancy. If the fetus is male, they introduce large amounts of female hormones, and if the fetus is female, they introduce a large amount of male hormones on the 6th week. What this creates is a man with a vagina or a woman with a penis. Back in the day, they used cow hormones to achieve this. Male and female cow hormones were introduced at the 6th week. This is why the royal trannies from the past all look like the ugliest women you have ever seen in your life. Princess Beatrice of Holland, for a start, what an absolute fucking munto. Bill Gates had a vagina and his boyfriend Melinda had a cock inversion. They inverted everything, not just the crucifix. It's simple to understand, not in any way complicated. It's just different information to what you're used to hearing. These days, they use human hormones for this process. That's why Jennifer Aniston had a massive cock and why Victoria's Secret models are all geezers. The elite have an option when they plan to have a child. They can transit in the womb and make it a free martin, or they can sacrifice it later when it's a toddler. Those are the two options available. The trans process is important. Demons want a trans host. Demons have no gender and they do not care if it's an ugly trans host. Looks matter not to the parasites. They were not here to impress you. They were here to mock and use you, rape you whenever they wanted, so looks were unimportant to them. In fact, they would rather look ugly and terrifying. It makes louche. Don't forget the 3 strings. 1. Perceived knowledge. 2. Finance. 3. Religion. Big love people. XXX.